What is going on, everybody? Nathan King here from Auburn Undercover and 24/7 Sports here inside Neville Arena for the last time this season, as here on Senior Day, Auburn gets a 92-78 victory over the Georgia Bulldogs. They complete the season sweep of Georgia, but more importantly, a win here today secured a top 4 spot in the SEC tournament for the Tigers. So we know what that bracket's going to look like. LSU and Missouri are still playing as I record this right now, but that doesn't have any effect on what Auburn is going to do. We'll get to that a little later. Long story short, though, Auburn is the number 4 seed. They finished number 4 in the league standings in terms of where they're going to be seated in Nashville. They actually finished tied for second in the league standings overall, only behind Tennessee, but they will play their first game Friday at approximately 2:30 Central Time there in Nashville against the 5 seed South Carolina or Arkansas or Vanderbilt if they come out of those first games on Wednesday and end up beating the Gamecocks. But Auburn got off to a really good start in this one here against Georgia. Obviously, it was just a couple weeks ago to the day that they played a really great game there in Athens. Not the same kind of domination offensively down the stretch for Auburn, particularly because they missed a lot of free throws. 60% from the free throw line in this game for Auburn is an area that you can nitpick if you want. It's the second worst free throw performance for them in the SEC this season. And then Bruce Pearl said it after again, 38 points in the paint for Georgia. Georgia never got within single digits in the second half, so this never really felt like it was out of control for Auburn. It felt like they had a good grasp of it the whole way, but credit to Georgia. They came to play. They had 2 separate 7-0 runs there in the first half to kind of make things a little interesting. Then they just kept punching back in the second half, but as is usually the case against teams that they're a lot better than, like Georgia, Auburn's depth allowed them to pull away there in the second half. But there are a couple things you can nitpick as Bruce Pearl and his team now go into a very long break. They have 6 days off, and that's, really what they wanted with that double bye in the SEC tournament. The SEC tournament and conference tournaments in general have proven to not matter that much necessarily for the NCAA tournament picture. I mean, look at Auburn all the way back in 2019. They were projected as a 5 seed, maybe a 6 seed going into that weekend or going into that week in Nashville. They run the table, they beat Tennessee, and they end up as a 5 seed. And so there's not a ton you can necessarily do, but Auburn can pick up a couple quad 1 wins maybe, so that matters. But more so, like Dylan Cardwell said this week, he said longevity is the biggest thing in March. That extra day matters. The fact that this team's going to have 6 days off until their next game, of course, that's their biggest break. Obviously they had that bye week during the season, but you just don't get breaks like that during the year. Anyway, back to this game. Denver Jones was absolutely fantastic for Auburn. A season-high 21 points for the FIU transfer. He made 7 of 9 triples. And he's a guy that you really need to watch heading into the postseason for Auburn. Of course, hot shooting guards are gonna do a lot for you in March. Auburn knows that better than anybody, of course. We talked about that Final Four team just a minute ago. He is now shooting 51% from beyond the arc over his last 11 games. So the last 11 games of the regular season leading into the postseason, and that's on 4.1 attempts per game. It's not like he's barely getting shots up. He is one of, if not the best three-point shooter in the SEC over the last month. He showed it today. Georgia was double-teaming, sometimes even triple-teaming Janai Broome. It worked a few times. Auburn had 8 turnovers in the second half. They were out of sorts a little bit, but Broome did have 5 assists in this game. He's done a really good job of managing those double teams pretty much all season long. They're going to have to continue to do that because they don't want him, potentially a second-team All-American type player. Teams would rather see somebody else beat him. But if Auburn is getting that kind of shooting from Denver Jones, another good game for them overall as a team, 48% from beyond the arc. So that's now 4 of their last 5 games of the regular season. Auburn shoots better than 40% from deep. If Auburn can keep getting that, particularly away from home, and obviously they're going to have a good opportunity to succeed there in March. It was senior day today for Auburn. You had Carter Sabera, Jalen Harper, Chris Moore, Katie Johnson, Dylan Cardwell, and Janai Broome as well were recognized here on the floor before the game. So lots of emotions there, particularly for guys like Moore and Cardwell and Katie Johnson. We'll get all into that in the offseason about the sort of stay or go decisions. But those are some guys who have some fifth-year options, obviously, with the COVID season from their freshman years that they can exercise to get an extra year of eligibility. So Auburn handles business here, 92-78. Now going into Nashville, you look at these teams that they could possibly match up against. Of course, South Carolina is going to be favored to be Auburn's matchup here, but obviously Vanderbilt and Arkansas could pull an upset there and face off against Auburn on Friday. Obviously, Auburn is 4-0 combined against those teams. 2 wins against Vanderbilt this year. The SEC opener where they bludgeoned Arkansas in Fayetteville, and then in here when they beat South Carolina by 40, 101-61. Something tells me it won't be the exact same result there in Nashville if they end up playing against the Gamecocks. But these are teams that Auburn has shown this season they have matched up well against. I believe 86-58 is the combined average score of those four games this season that Auburn has played against those teams. But, a counterpoint to that is something Bruce Pearl talked about post-game. He said, look at what those teams did today. Vanderbilt beat Florida. A bunch of people were saying, well, Florida's the team you don't want to see in Nashville. Well, Vanderbilt saw Florida in Nashville today, and they hung on and beat them in a pretty dramatic game. There at the end, South Carolina goes on the road to Mississippi State. Mississippi State, it's a team that's gotten a couple really big wins there on their home floor, Auburn and Tennessee. South Carolina goes in there and gets a win in overtime. And then Arkansas goes to Alabama, leads by a bunch, some questionable officiating there at the end of the game. They drop that game in Tuscaloosa, but still Arkansas is playing relative to the rest of the season, playing pretty decent basketball of late. So Bruce Pearl, saying, look at those three teams. Like, I'm understanding that maybe it is a little bit more favorable part of the bracket, and I agree. I mean, you don't see Kentucky and you don't see Florida in that first game, which obviously Kentucky is all the way up to the 2 seed. But Auburn, when you lose by double digits like they did on the road to Florida, and Florida's just kind of a team that nobody wants to see in the SEC, you still feel like you match up really well against the Gamecocks, especially on a neutral floor. That's where Auburn thinks they might obviously have a fan advantage there in Nashville. Nashville's becoming a place where Auburn goes to a lot, and so they're obviously hoping to have that next week. But the bracket will be official here on Saturday night, but Auburn knows its path, and they'll have an opportunity in Nashville to bolster that NCAA tournament resume a little bit. But we'll talk about those games all week long, and then we'll know who Auburn's opponents are, and Auburn will only know a day ahead of time. So it's getting to that part of the season where conference tournament play, you're preparing for a few different teams all at the same time. So we'll have preview coverage of that, of course, all week from Neville Arena for the final time this season. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the War Eagle Wake Up. I'm Nathan King. We will catch you guys in Nashville.